librarian here if I haven't met you yet. We're thrilled to be hosting this event tonight and to create opportunities for the public to interact with and ask questions of our local candidates. Learning about our potential representatives is an important part of our democracy, and I'm glad you could all attend, whether you are here live or listening in later. A few notes before we get started. First, the restrooms and emergency exit are located in the back corner. Second, please, a reminder to please silence your cell phones. Finally, on the tables here, we have some city and voter-related information and materials, as well as coffee, tea, and snacks for you throughout the night. A few reminders on deadlines. The registration deadline for voting is Monday, November 7th in person. Early in-person voting is happening now through November 7th. The deadline for absentee ballots is November 8th, which is Election Day. And Election Day is 1 week from Tuesday, November 8th. I will now read the rules for our forum. Rule number 1, the timer will let each candidate know when he or she has half a minute remaining. Candidates will be asked to finish promptly when time is up. The moderator will ask members of the audience to pose questions without comments, i.e. editorializing. The forum is designed to hear the candidates' views and not the audience's. The audience will have the option to ask questions verbally themselves, or they can write their question on cards for the moderator to ask. And we do have some note cards on our table over there. If a member of the audience asks a question that can be answered yes or no, the candidates are allowed to qualify or explain their answers. The forum is meant to help voters understand the candidate's position, not force candidates to select answers they don't feel comfortable about. If questions or answers become repetitive or courtesy is not shown, the moderator will intervene. We have planned on 90 minutes tonight. KGVM 95.9 is recording this forum, and it will be stored on kgvm.org as a podcast. The Candidate Board Forum is being hosted by Belgrade Community Library Foundation and sponsored by our foundation, Bozeman Professional Women, AAUW, and the League of Women Voters Bozeman area, and the Bozeman Public Library. Thank you to all organizations and people involved. Our timers are volunteers from the League of Women Voters, Patty Steinmuller and Jane Artson Schumacher. The moderator this evening is Sally Mason, a member of the board of the League of Women Voters. I would like to turn our time over to Sally, who will introduce our panel and outline how our forum will run tonight. Thank you all.
Would it be better for all of you if when candidates are speaking that you stand so you can see it better? Isn't that okay with you guys? Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce him herself. And then after that we'll do a prepared question where I'll talk about that. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is whoever starts first, then the next person starts first the next time, and the next person, and the next person. And if you guys can keep track of it, I'm terrible at keeping track of this, and I often screw it up. So if you keep track of that, that will help me a lot. So who would like to introduce him, herself first? Elizabeth?
Sure, I'll go first. First of all, we're going to test out this mic. Should we raise it if we're going to stand, or you think this is good enough?
That's fine.
Yep, okay, great. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to AAUW, the League of Women Voters, the Belgrade Library, and the Bozeman Professional Women. I'm Elizabeth Marum. I've lived in Belgrade for 26 years, where I raised my sons as a single parent. They graduated from the Belgrade schools and the Montana universities. I was their sole supporter, and I beat the odds because I kept my head down, I dug in, and I did the work. I have waited, listened, and worked for 26 years to prepare myself to run. I like to put that to use for House District 67 and the state of Montana now. Our community, our county, and our state are changing. I've heard from constituents the rapid growth, the lack of attainable housing are key concerns. I served on the Belgrade City County Planning Board for 12 years and the Triangle Planning Coordination Committee, and I'm well versed in these issues. We can do better. Montana has been at the bottom of the wage scale for as long as I can remember. We are 47th now. Our businesses can't make up the difference in wages when folks who are coming here have made better wages for decades, or they can work from home making wages from large American cities. We can't fight this, but we can and must work with it. The state can take measures to make housing more affordable, and that's why I'm running for office. It's also time to acknowledge the role women play in society as leaders, professionals, collaborators, partners, and sometimes moms. I'm running for office. I've discovered a great deal about myself. The time for more female leadership is now. I will not be a career politician. I'm not in it for the glory, though our political process rewards that. I will work for freedom, freedom to make our own healthcare decisions, for equal protection under the law, and the freedom to live and play close to where we work. Thank you.
Can I ask you not to applaud?
So, hello everyone, my name is Jedediah Hinkle. I'm a current representative in the Belgrade area, House District 67. It actually takes in some Bozeman addresses also. This will be much shorter. Just want to introduce some basics about myself. So, currently in my first term in the House, hopefully be elected to my second term. I was formerly in the state Senate also, out of Four Corners to West Yellowstone into the college. I considered my Senate district probably the most diverse in interest Senate districts there was in the state. I mean, I had college interest all the way to recreation at the park and small business, everything in between. And my wife and I currently live in Belgrade. We're going to run 2 small businesses out of Belgrade area. Previously, I actually worked 18 years in the field of fisheries biology, and I received my degree at MSU in Fish and Wildlife Management. At that time, literally, this was my job. I would put on a pack and I would go hiking the mountains every day, exploring somewhere in southern Montana. So sometimes I had to pinch myself to believe that I was actually doing that type of work. So 2 of my 3 legislative sessions, I was selected for either vice chair or chairmanships of committees. I've served on the Judiciary Committee, the Fish and Game Committee, the Transportation Committee, State Administration Committee, which deals with like pensions, election law, things like that, Natural Resources, and last session was chair of Legislative Administration Committee. And I currently serve on the Environmental Quality Council Environmental Quality Interim Committee, which is kind of a hodgepodge of environmental topics and fish and game issues and some water related issues. So with that, I only got a few seconds left, and we'll get on with the forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe?
I'm Joe Hancock, running for District 68, and I'm originally from Big Timber, and after I graduated high school, I joined the Air Force, where I had the pleasure to serve for 3.5 years in England with tours in Bamako, Mali, and Sub-Saharan Africa, Kuwait, and Tirana, Albania. After I returned from the Air Force, I did some paperwork issues with the VA before I was able to start college, but once that was taken care of, I started my degree in construction engineering technology. After I graduated from that, I joined the workforce and eventually went for a second degree in political science. And then I started working in hotels, which, for better or for worse, paid my bills. I now work at MSU in the accounting department, which is a much better thing because I now sleep at night. It's me, and I've decided that I should run for office because in my adult life, most of my work has been in public service, working first in the Air Force. Then I worked for the YMCA doing a summer camp, literacy loss prevention summer camp. I also worked for the BLM for a summer. And in that time, I've learned that doing public good is the thing I'm best at. And the best way for me to help the most people as possible at the same time is in governance. And
Caleb Hinkle, the current office holder for House District 68, the beautiful sunny south side of Belgrade. When I first ran in 2020, it was in the midst of the pandemic, a very sour point in our nation's history that saw massive intrusions and violations of our individual liberties from all levels of government. I made a promise to pretty much everyone I met in House District 68 to do everything in my power to stop this intrusion into our lives and keep as much of their hard-earned taxes in their pockets as humanly possible. And we did just that this last session, not only passing the most fiscally conservative state budget in 16 years, but reforming the entire state of emergency procedure, as well as permanently protecting our businesses from unwarranted harassment from county health boards. Before serving as a representative, I proudly served our state and nation for 6 years in the Montana Army National Guard as an 11 Charlie indirect fire infantryman. And I have a very diverse jobs history and resume for a 30-year-old, with jobs ranging from sapphire minings to bringing in and pushing out planes from our booming airport. I was even employed by Congressman Gianforte's congressional staff as his Western Montana Regional Field Representative. And currently today, outside of the legislature, I cut and haul lumber at a local lumber yard to support our booming housing industry. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello everyone, my name is Damion Lynn. I'm running for Senate District 34, which is both of their districts put together. My background is in environmental science. I graduated from Montana State University in 2019. After graduating, I worked as an analytical chemist, where I mainly tested well water, public drinking water, and wastewater. From there, I went on to work as a water and sewer operator in Four Corners. And now I work for the county reviewing septic system applications. So my background's really been in public infrastructure, wastewater management, and that sort of a field. And that's what I want to be able to go to the state and improve for Senate District 34 is how we deal with our wastewater, making sure that we get our infrastructure so that way we can build the houses that we need to alleviate the housing crises that we're facing, so that way we can make sure that small businesses and large businesses and medium businesses have people who are able to live here and work here and keep our community growing and vibrant. So for me, the most important thing is, with our growth in our cities and towns is we've got to mitigate the environmental impacts that we have on it. We want to make sure that we're not polluting our lakes and streams. And one of a significant polluter is, where does our poop go? So to me, that's something that I'd really like to bring my current level of expertise to the state and represent you guys. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shelley Vance. I'm running for Senate District 34 against Damion. Our district is a makeup, like he said, of both Jed and Caleb's current district, House District 68, 67, makeup 34. So, a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Bozeman. I've lived here my entire life. I was born south on a ranch we had a cattle ranch, so I was involved in 4-H and the Montana Hereford Association. From that point in time, growing up, I had 2 children, 2 boys. We actually lived on part of the family ranch that had an extension out here in Belgrade between. Part of the ranch was between Bollinger and Collins Road. So lived out there in the early 80s. From there I went on to work in the clerk and recorder's office. Starting in 81, I became the elected clerk and recorder in 1988 and served as your county clerk and recorder since from 89 till 2006. Why I am wanting to run, I believe the best things that I can give you, when my husband served in the legislature, I went up with him, so I have 12 years of legislative staff experience at the Capitol, along with my local government experience. I think I can really add to the legislature. I understand the local government part of it. I can put it with my state. Thank you very much.
At the end, we're all going to stand up and cheer. We asked the candidates to answer the following question. And they have 2 minutes apiece to do it, and we're going to start with Jedediah. The question we asked is, what is the most pressing issue for the 2023 legislature, and what legislation would you propose to address it? It's a big question.
So I've had the experience of serving in a session where we didn't have money and a session where we did have money. And in my experience, in a session where we do have money, it becomes a feeding frenzy by government. You have way more bills. You might have 1,000 more bills in a session with more money than a session without. Right now, Montana has what's projected to be a $1.8 billion surplus. Under all the years under Governor Bullock, I don't remember ever seeing anything more than a $300 to $400 million surplus. 1 year with Republican leadership and governor's office, we're up to $1.8 billion surplus in the state. So the big question is, how are we going to spend that money? What I propose and what Republicans have proposed is we need to turn that money back to taxpayers, because all of our funds, basically our fire funds, 85% funded. We're fully funded pretty much in the state everywhere, and we have this excess surplus. Right now, people are, voters in my district that I've been talking to are struggling with, high gas costs, high grocery costs. If they were lucky to get into a house, they're paying exorbitant mortgages on those houses. And now we have a federal government that's trying to put us into a recession. I have people who are not paying their mortgages. I think now is the time that we can return this money back to the taxpayers of Montana in both income tax and property tax relief and help them out, especially because this winter now they're projecting higher energy costs. So we need to give this money back to the people of Montana, but the big issue is going to be how much can we give back because of the feeding frenzy that's going to happen this session, and all the hands are going to be in the cookie jar. And with that, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, start first.
No, I'm going this way.
Going this way? All right.
I don't know why, but we
I'm the moderator, so I guess I have no choice. All right, so for me, the most pressing issue, I would say the housing crisis, but I feel like enough people are going to use that I'm going to stick with school staffing and teacher pay, which also is exacerbated by the housing crisis because teachers aren't paid enough to live where the schools are. And in the rural parts of the state, we're seeing it in a much bigger scale. And the type of legislation that I would look for is something that would be an expansion on a bill that's actually passed in the 2021 session. House Bill 663 actually earmarked money to go toward rural schools to help them fund their staffing, and they can use that money to also offset property tax mills that are used to fund the schools, which should thus lower the property taxes that people are concerned about rising as house values go up within the state. And that is my answer.
Okay, thank you.
For years now, the #1 problem that's been facing Montanans is our levels of property taxes. One of the reasons this problem has gone on for so long is because the vast majority of property taxes are collected at the city and county levels. And this is where the major increases have been. In fact, the state of Montana actually does not collect a lot of property taxes. Therefore, we only have authority over probably less than 10% of property taxes collected. Endless unchecked growth in spending from many cities and counties has increased the need to increase property taxes. And this is a trickle-down problem. Ever increasing property taxes ultimately leads to higher rent. My solution is going to be a simple one. Cap city and county spending based on population rates and adjusted, of course, for inflation. The Republican-held legislature prides itself on keeping our budget as slim as possible. so that we can keep money in your pocket. It is time for the cities and counties budget to budget for what is only necessary and not frivolous. Thank you.
I will answer that the biggest issue that we're going to be facing is housing. And for me, I see three big opportunities in the 2023 session. The first one is to give back inclusionary zoning as a tool for cities and counties to use. Belgrade, previous to 2021, did not have one of these, but Bozeman did, and the reason why that's important is that Bozeman is obviously larger. If they can't handle their own housing problem, people are going to be forced further and further out. And that's what we've seen. We've seen lots of people who would have typically lived in Bozeman, move to Belgrade, move to Manhattan, and even all the way up into Three Forks. And so if we can give that tool back, you know, let counties and cities say, hey, developers, if you want to develop here, go for it. But we're going to require 10 to 30% of the houses being built in the area to be within an affordability window. And because we're requiring you to do that, we're going to give you some breaks on things like setbacks and other regulatory requirements. The next thing is that, you know, I've watched a lot of the governor's housing task force, and one of the biggest things that I've heard from realtors and developers is that subdevelopment, building new subdevelopments takes too long to get them approved. And that's because at the state level, with the Department of Environmental Quality, there are 2 engineers that oversee everything for the entire state. They're incredibly understaffed. This is the same for OPI and basically every state department. And so the final thing is a tax circuit break. So that way for property owners who are on fixed incomes, they are able to not be priced out of their homes. Thank you.
For me, I believe it's kind of a 3-tiered thing. The biggest obstacle that the legislature is going to face is because of growth in western Montana and because of inflation throughout Montana that we're all trying to we're struggling with. I believe that the balancing that budget and addressing the revenue surplus that we have is going to be the biggest thing. And I think it's going to be difficult because there are certain parts of state government that we have heard are in dire need of being something done with them. Our state health facilities are a mess. Our prison system, or not our system, but our prison is in trouble. And yet we have got a huge surplus because we all received, well, most of this, I would imagine, received money, federal money. That money was taxed upon. That is part of that revenue that was unanticipated, and we need to be really smart about it. So I really do believe that one of the biggest thing is going to be this. It's going to be a tough, hard discussion. So, thank you.
Affordable housing. I mean, I've been working on this for 6 years, and I've been paying attention to it for a lot longer. But our issue is attainable, accessible, affordable housing. I think the state should implement taxes on non-resident homeowners, on second homes, and remember that in every policy there's nuance. So I'm not defining those, but I'm saying not the cabin on the lake that's been in the family for 5 generations. So non-resident owners, second homes, luxury properties, And then let constituencies, let the various localities decide if they want to tax Airbnbs and VRBOs or regulate them in some kind of way. But don't stand in the way of localities from doing that. And the state at the last session precluded a low-income housing tax credit. With so many federal programs, what I've seen is that there's a layering of a bunch of federal sources of money that can go into making it more incentivizing for a developer to build truly affordable housing. And affordable housing, by federal terms, is no more than 30% of your income. It's non-existent in Gallatin County. So we can and we must do better, because we're never going to be able to make up for the lost 2 or 3 decades that we've underbuilt. One Valley Community Foundation a year and a half ago released that there were already 6,800 units, housing units, that we were going to be behind by 2026. And then, you know, COVID has only made that worse. So we can do so much on this.
Thank you, everybody. Now we're going to have questions from the audience. And would you stand to ask your questions so that we can all hear? If you ask a yes/no question, candidates can always say more than yes/no. Those are, a yes/no question is tricky. And also, if you want to pass, everybody gets a crack at every question. But if you want to pass or say, I agree with her, him, that's okay too. And would you stand when you ask the question, please? Who would like to ask the question? Yes, ma'am, right there.
Yeah, I have a question regarding medical freedom that I'd like you guys to answer. ACIP last week just voted 15-0 to add the COVID shots to our list of childhood immunizations. Right now, the state of Montana has medical exemptions. We also have religious exemptions.
And your question?
My question is, would you support a bill for a philosophical exemption? Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants, it's Joe's turn.
Didn't I go first the last time? I went second.
Edward's 1 minute.
1 minute, what's
For
1
everyone.
minute?
Yeah.
Vaccinations are a very complicated issue, and I would probably not support a philosophical exemption, because generally speaking, that's a slippery slope. And vaccinations have done wonders to virtually wipe out measles, mumps, rubella, and several other things. So if we start to push for a philosophical exemption for one specific vaccine, then we may very well run into issues where that leads to schools with multiple kids who have no vaccinations, which can cause actual outbreaks of measles or mumps, etc., and that increases medical costs, can cause fatalities that are unnecessary. So I generally oppose that.
Thank you.
I would absolutely support it. You know what's best for your body. End of story. Thank you.
I would oppose it. I'm a big fan of public health and the standards that we get to enjoy today in public health are because of the invention of vaccines. If we, like Joe said, stop giving or start allowing everyone to not receive vaccines, we will risk seeing polio return. We'll risk rubella, mumps, measles, all sorts of really just awful diseases that kill kids, that kill adults, that kill the elderly, and for me, that's a non-starter.
Shelley?
I would absolutely support medical freedom.
Elizabeth?
I disagree with the premise of the question. I don't think we have a philosophical dispensation for any of the other vaccinations, so I just disagree with the premise of the question. I will say this, that personally, I'm vaccinated and boosted. I forget how many booster shots I've gotten, but I do it for my own self-protection, and I do it for the protection of everyone in this room. So that's my personal feeling about it.
If you think about it, if we're only allowing exemptions for religious and medical, that's kind of discriminatory towards everyone else, isn't it? What if you're not religious? What if you don't have a medical condition? There are people who eat organically because they want good things to go in their body. There are people that I know who refuse to take ibuprofen because they don't want to put bad things into their body. If you look at the vaccine list, there's a lot of harmful ingredients that could be detrimental to a person's body. And who is anyone else to tell them that they have to put that into their body? So really, if you believe in freedom, you should believe in philosophical opposition to vaccines, and I do support that.
Thank you. Another question? Yes, ma'am.
One of our local institutions that is not fully funded is the Gallatin County Rest Home. And I'd like to know if you would support fully funding Medicaid reimbursements so that nursing facilities can stay open.
I don't know why we always have to go to the public funding more and more tax dollars, and that's the only solution that government can possibly come up with. Let's throw the solution out to the private sector. Let's look for donors, all sorts of things like that. People are being taxed to death, quite honestly, here in the county, throughout the state. I do not, and I oppose the levy as well.
Damion?
I think rest homes are very important. And that the state, at the state level, the state has failed all of the residents in Montana by not funding these programs at the appropriate level. And 100% we should be funding them so that way they can fully be reimbursed via Medicaid. So yeah.
Shelley?
At the present time, I can't honestly, sorry, no, that's all right. At the present time, I can't honestly say that I would support it 100% fully funding of it. I honestly am going to need more information. I'm a brand new person in the legislature, hopefully, and but I would definitely, I support the mill levy for the rest home. I realize that's not the answer to your question, but I'd have to get more information.
Most of Medicaid funding comes from the federal government. Montana has a small slice of a share that we give as a good faith co-funding mechanism. And so when we deny our co-funding mechanism, we're saying no to Medicaid. I support the rest home. I hope, long live the rest home and its residents. But we should definitely fund our portion, the state's portion of those Medicaid dollars that will keep that rest home open and thriving.
Under the current Medicaid system in Montana, I would say no. I would say when Medicaid was expanded in Montana, it expanded Medicaid to everybody within 130% of the federal poverty level. You could be a working age person that can get a job and be contributing. I met people on the door who refuse to get work because they get Medicaid benefits. And when I questioned them about that, they said, yeah, I know it's not right, but it's the best thing for me and my family right now. So you have people who are taking advantage of the Medicaid system here in Montana. And I do not agree with expanding the reimbursements until we fix Medicaid in Montana. Thank you.
would say yes, because I believe that the Gallatin Rest Home is a very important facility, and we need to fund it the best way possible. And my biggest concern with, say, allowing the private sector and putting the private sector in charge of things like this is the fact that they're profit-driven and they're not accountable to voters. Whereas as legislators, we generally do what the voters ask us to do because that's actually the job. Whereas in the private sector, as long as they're making money, they do what they choose. So we need to make sure that as voters and as governors, we make sure that the people that matter the most to us are actually taken care of in this life.
Yes, Lynn?
So I would like to know how the candidates feel about mask mandates for children in school, past and future.
Sure. Mask mandates in the school. You start first. That's fine.
I would say it totally depends on any future pandemics. I can't predict the future for past mandates. I think that masking for children isn't necessarily the best technique because I've seen lots of children, they're not great at wearing masks. So other alternatives, smaller class sizes, more spread out, not homeschooling, but being able to attend school via online resources or other methods are probably more impactful than masking for kids in high school. They can wear masks, but in elementary school, those kids, they're kids. They put dirt in their mouth. It's going to be difficult to get them to wear masks at the appropriate level that we would need.
Shelley?
No, I'm absolutely not supportive of anyone, but especially children with wearing masks. No.
Godfrey Saunders, the Belgrade superintendent, was one of the first people to remove the mask mandate. And I know he did it for good reasons. I will tell you that my 3-year-old granddaughter wore a mask every day at school, and she did fine. I think that we put things on our very small children that are a reflection of our own values. And I think in many ways it's unfair to the kids. And I don't oppose or promote masks. I mean, when they're needed, they're needed. Damion walked in tonight with a mask on because he's had a cold all week. I would be wearing a mask too. I don't think that masks should be a virtue signal or a dis signal.
Yeah, I would absolutely oppose masks on children. I think if you actually look at the data and go beyond what the media, the mainstream media tells you, you will find that children, if we're talking about the past, because you mentioned the past, are the least susceptible to COVID by far. And yet, the mask, there's data that suggests that the mask has actually hurt children as far as their learning goes. So they're not susceptible to COVID-19, and they are susceptible to learning impairment due to these masks and mandates. So in the future, of course, it would depend on the situation in the future, but given our past experience, I'd say it's more detrimental than it is helpful.
I would say generally speaking, the masks probably wouldn't be nearly as helpful as actually putting money into our school systems to actually improve ventilation systems and spacing and class sizes so that the kids can actually get fresh air while they're in the school and they can actually have space to actually work. And that would do way more than having them wear masks, because respiratory diseases, and you're not sitting close to someone, I'm not worried about getting sick from Damion because he's way over there. Or even if Jed were sick, I'd be fine. But in the class sizes where they're sitting closer to me all over there, it's really tough for us to keep the kids from catching catching the different diseases that they have going around, that God knows public schools are just incubators for viruses.
Absolutely opposed. Agree with Jen and Shelley 100%. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Where do each of you stand on Initiative 131 and the question of a woman's right to choose more broadly?
Shelley?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Where do
hear
you
the
stand
last,
on LR 131?
and the rest I didn't get.
A woman's right to
A
choose.
woman's right to choose.
I support LR 131, and I am opposed to abortion.
Women are first-class citizens, and half of our state are made up of women, and we deserve privacy in our healthcare as stated in the Montana Constitution and ratified in the Armstrong decision. Family conditions should not be dictated by the state legislature. The state legislature should no more dictate, cancer treatments or medications than they should women's reproductive care. LR 131 is particularly incisive and cruel when it comes to the fetal abnormalities of a baby born term or induced, preterm, and preventing that family from having a time to grieve with their little one after they've invested so much into this little one.
Okay.
So on LR 131, if you actually look at the legislation, it says medically necessary, you protect the life of the child and provide medical needs or assessment when it's medically necessary and it's reasonable. When the left goes out there and says, well, doctors and these people will be they'll have felonies, they'll be thrown in jail over this LR 131 passes, that's nothing more than fear mongering. The reason why, as it was referred to, the reason why medically necessary and reasonable is placed in that legislation is so that when you run into those situations where a child is born and maybe it has some problem with an organ and it cannot live outside the mother's womb, then it's not medically necessary to keep that child alive. It's not considered reasonable to keep that child alive. So when you look at 131, it basically comes down to, do you believe that when a child is born and living and breathing, that life should be protected or that life should be terminated? And that's what LR 131 deals with.
Joe?
I voted no on LR 131 because I believe that we spend entirely too much time concerned about the life of an embryo and not nearly enough of it on the lives of actual children and the women who bear them.
Strong yes support. It isn't even a question at this point. That's a living, breathing child in this world with a heartbeat. It's not even an abortion question at that point. So absolutely yes, I believe it's a moral thing to do. Also, once again, I am opposed to abortion. I believe in protecting life and liberty of all individuals born or unborn.
To me, LR 131 represents, the definition of government overreach. As a legislature, I should have zero say in what someone decides with their doctor. That's between that person and a doctor, and they should choose what is most medically prudent for that individual. So for me, LR 131 is poorly written and leaves room for interpretation that is only detrimental to everyone in the state.
Another question? Yes, ma'am, and then you're next, okay? You.
Thanks. Suzanne McKay-Oler. I actually lived in the district of these two, so I'd like to address the questions, both of them, and of course others can answer. Affordability has come up quite a lot tonight, and that's the reason I'm here. I'm highly concerned about it being more than $400 a month more for American families to live today, and certainly the housing, etc. here that everyone's talked about. I think a big part of affordability is wage, as you mentioned. Oh, I'm going to ask a question. But more importantly is take-home pay and how much money is left to spend at the end of the day. So it's come up a couple of times, and I'm concerned about the surplus in the government, and I think it's nearing $2 billion. It's very big, which is awesome. At the same time, it means that many people have paid taxes here, cut their wage. So the question to the two candidates here, I think I heard the answer from Mr. Hinkle, but for candidate Marum, would you be in favor of returning most of the surplus to taxpayers like myself and those in the room?
I have heard, 1.2, 1.4, $1.7 billion in surplus. I have a hard time figuring out what the surplus is. I will say this, that the state has a budget process, and it's a finely tuned process where you go line by line through every part of the budget. And I think that it was wise for the legislators to deny that in a bipartisan way, so that they could go through that budget line by line and do the rigorous study of the budget. And if some of it is returned to the taxpayers, great. But there really needs to be enough to properly fund schools and teacher salaries, and then enough to consider mental health needs in Warm Springs and in the state. And this money has come from COVID tax relief, better than expected tax revenues, and then a rainy day fund. And we do need the rainy day fund.
The question actually was, would you
Whoa.
I answered it.
Sit down.
We have a
Sit down.
Please stop.
So we have a moderator.
I said that I would return some if it were available.
No, you've asked your question, so I would ask you to be seated. Go ahead and take it.
I'm not lost where I was gonna start. First, what I want to address, this is surplus money. This is one-time money. So when we talk about funding teachers into the future, when we talk about long-term tax cuts, when we talk about putting more towards government programs that go on into the future, that money needs to be what's called structurally balanced, which means we take forecasts years ahead and say, can we afford this in the state? With this surplus money, we don't do that, because you can't fund a long-term tax cut with money that's already in the bank. It's a one-time money. You have to know that you're going to have money going into the future. So the question isn't about using this money to fund those long-term things. This question is, what do we use the money for right now? And we're already full in many of our programs, and the programs that we want to spend more on need to be structurally balanced. So what I would say is, yes, we need to return this money back to the taxpayer. We collected more than what we needed, and people are in need right now, like you, and we need to return that money back to you, at least most of it. Thank you.
Joe?
I'm not in favor of returning most of it, because there are several things. I know structural balance makes sense and all, but there are certain things that we could put a fair amount of money into, that we can, to build what I would call an infrastructure for future funding. Because yes, we need to do work for healthcare, especially mental health. That's one of my biggest things, because most of the problems we have later in life are because of mental health issues in our younger days. And I feel like we could put a fair amount of the money into actually just rebuilding crumbling infrastructure and focusing on the rural counties that are losing population and their property tax base, and starting to actually try to fold.
Thank you. Caleb?
Absolutely, and we also have to consider that this is money that the state over-collected from the taxpayers, ultimately. They did not need this money to fund anything else. So, and honestly, that is taxpayers' property, in my opinion. So, yes, absolutely.
It's my opinion that, the reason why the state has this money is to do stuff with it. And the fact that it's sitting on this giant nest egg and not doing anything with it is a mistake in my eyes. And so we should do stuff. We should, in a sense, return this money to our communities, but not just a government handout, but through funding our programs at appropriate levels. I know that Jed said everything is fully funded, but our state departments across the board don't have staff because they can't hire people, because people look at the wage that they're going to be making and the cost of housing and say, oh, I can't make that work. And so we should be using that however many $1 billion to reduce that difference between wages and cost of housing, and fund the things that our government needs to do for us.
Shelley?
Montana has, in our constitution, we are required to have a balanced budget. So when the last legislative session was over with, we had a balanced budget. Collecting money in, we have unanticipated revenues from over in excess. That money, this is what I was talking about earlier, this is where the big discussion's gonna take place. We've got some facilities that maybe need some addressing, but that money is not money that was was put forth in the budget. It does belong to the taxpayers, and a majority of that needs to go back to the taxpayers.
You know, the discourse in this country has been ugly at best. And so I want, and our candidates have very differing views, clearly. But I would implore all of you to be polite and considerate. These people are running for office. How many of us would like to run for office? Certainly not me. Yeah, Christine.
I am Christine Menicucci. I want to come back to local government because I'm up to my ears in local government. Some of the surplus money could return the 2-cent gas tax that was taken from us. We need to repair our streets. We need infrastructure. Our growth is out of control, really. And the people, the 2 cents that is added on is nothing to what we have to do to raise taxes to support the infrastructure. We would like our 2 cents a gallon back. The question is, are you willing to negotiate to give money back to the cities, the local governments that you took away?
Thank you. Okay. Jim?
What I would say is that, and I agree, the legislature has historically opposed local option sales taxes. And in 1 minute, I can't go into exactly why I think that's a bad idea for Gallatin and other counties. But essentially, that's what it is. It's actually not a lot of counties in the state were actually using that 2 cents. But the option was there, and the option was found. And the option was creating problems between gas stations and competition based on where your gas station was located. Was it in the bounds of that city or bounds of that county? Was it just outside of the county line? Some gas stations would be having to charge extra for a tax, other gas stations wouldn't. So we opposed local option sales taxes kind of for that reason. So I would not support initiating a local option sales tax again, whether it's gas or anything else, and it looks like my time's up. Thank you.
Joe?
Generally speaking, I support the local option of taxing individuals. What's that?
Got it. I'm sorry.
Timer error.
Started
Just-
over.
yeah.
Timer error, that happens. Wait, just wait. Listen, you're gonna think.
Yeah.
Gotta wait for that chorus to come around again.
Okay. Okay,
I'm ready?
you're ready. I'm ready. You're
Okay,
ready.
well then I'm ready.
Okay.
Generally speaking, I support maximizing local control for options like taxation on fuel and sales, resort tax, things of that nature, because the individuals who are imposing those taxes were elected by the people who reside within those cities or counties. Or in the case of Big Sky, in a corporation, I guess. But I generally support those because those are the people that are most closely involved with the people living in those areas, and they know them personally, as opposed to at the state level where they probably don't even know like 97 of the 100 legislators in the state.
Oppose any tax or adding to the price of gasoline at this point in this economy, I think would be very, very inappropriate for constituents. Thank you.
I think that, like Joe said, I'm.
That's not me.
Oh.
We'll have to start again.
We silence our problem.
Okay, start over, Damion.
So like Joe said, I'm in favor of letting counties and cities decide that through their elected officials. I don't think that there's any reason to tell cities and counties, no, you're not allowed to use a 2% or a 2-cent gas tax. I know that it pays for a lot of road improvements, and that's something that we are in desperate need of across the state.
Shelley?
I'm not sure if I understood your question, because I think you kind of cut it, but, so for just safety's sake, if there's a problem with that 2%, if the state took that away from you, is that what you
2
said?
cents.
2 cents, yes,
A gallon.
the 2 cents a gallon, because of the boundary and the management of it, is what Jed was kind of going to. I'm not sure, Christine, in general, I am against a local option tax. I think there's a better way to do stuff. Not exactly sure how that is gonna be done. Our tax system in Montana, the whole thing is kind of a mess. So, not real supportive of it at this point in time.
Elizabeth?
I agree with Shelley that the tax system is kind of a mess. I would say that 2 cents a gallon gas tax is needed by Gallatin County. So the Montana Association of Counties had this session for us to learn about property taxes and such. So counties get half of the cost of living inflation adjustment that the state does. I think the state should be more generous with the counties to keep the counties alive. And Gallatin County just happens to be the fastest growing county in the state and has been for a very long time. So yeah, we need the money. Would it be good for Belgrade and Gallatin County to have more buy-in by people that are here as tourists? Yes. You know, I think it's all in the nuance, but I agree with the premise of this county getting more.
Hey there, my name's Bryce. I work in Bozeman Public Schools. Montana teachers are paid pretty abysmally compared to the rest of the nation. I'm curious what your plan is to increase teacher pay and retain the talent that we have in our public schools.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Bill?
Yes, he asked how.
Oh, wait.
Could I repeat the question?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, all right, so Bryce.
And don't start his time yet.
Yeah. So generally, Bryce mentioned that Montana, are we last or second place, I don't remember, in median teacher pay in the country?
Last for teachers starting pay.
There we go. So his question was, what would each of us do to improve that situation, to increase teacher pay, to make it more for us to actually hire a teacher. And it turns out I actually answered that question earlier when I talked about the most important issue in the state. But I will revisit it, and I will expand on it a little bit. So,
Not too much.
so we get a fair amount of lodging tax, and Bozeman especially gets a fair amount, and I would want to use some of that to offset property tax revenues and incentivize schools to increase their funding to increase teacher pay. Because one, it would lower property tax burdens for homeowners, and two, it would help us hire teachers so that the rural counties are not forced to hire uncertified instructors to teach the classes.
I'd have to say school choice. Give, instead of just blatant, just throwing out that your kid has to go to this automatically budgeted school here, increase competition among schools from all sectors. And then you will see the better schools and everything, get the better teachers for the better pay and all that. And so I believe in competition, not just a blanket budget statement. Thank you.
The state of Montana has continually decreased its funding of public school systems over the last decade, 20 years. And to make up for it, counties have had to raise property taxes to be able to pay their teachers. And so the state needs to increase its funding of our public school system, because public schools shouldn't be a competition. It shouldn't matter where a child is growing up, they should be able to go to school.
Shelley? I believe that we're gonna be in another situation with employing, who asked that question? Oh, there you go. I lost you for a minute. With regard to employment for all state employees, not just our teachers, I think there's gonna be discussions about that. I would agree, though, that I think we need to look for opening up options for all types of schools. And I think that we can get quality teachers that will assist in those schools, public and private.
I would ask the state to tax out-of-state homeowners, second homes, and luxury properties, bring down our property taxes, fully fund the schools where most of the children go. Charter schools are not the answer because they can allow only the cream of the crop of the kids to be educated there. And we need good, thriving schools and well-paid teachers, because this is a profession where teachers are leading. In Belgrade, we had 3 homeless teachers last year. This is unacceptable. We're gonna have a mill levy again in May. That's our property taxes. Do we vote against our future and our kids, or do we vote for the schools? My kids went to the Belgrade schools. They graduated, and then they went to Montana universities. I appreciate our public schools. So I would want to fund teacher salaries.
So last session, there was a bill to incentivize increased pay for week teachers, and I did support that bill. Again, if we're talking about wage increases, we have to look into the future. What's going to happen with the economy into the future? We have a federal government that spent $7 trillion in a year and a half and put us into the worst inflation in 40 years. We have a Federal Reserve who is literally trying to cause a recession to combat the inflation. So what is a recession going to do to Montana's economy? So when we talk about wages, and it's not just like what Shelley said, it's not just school teachers, it's all state employees. What are we going to be able to afford into the future? What are those projections going to look like for Montana? We have to balance our budget. So one of my concerns, honestly, because I was formerly a public employee, I worked for the Forest Service, And you do actually, for your state services, they need to keep pace with the private sector to a certain extent. I mean, a lot of times they get benefits, the private sector doesn't. But we need to look at employee retention for state jobs in general. That is an important consideration.
You next, back there, in the very back.
Me.
Yeah, you.
My name is Mickey Servo, and I've lived in Belgrade for almost 25 years. We've homeschooled all 3 of our kids, and we've gotten not a dime back from the
And
government
your
for it.
question, it's a question.
I'm getting there, ma'am. Give me a moment, okay? It's important that I say this in the right way, okay? So my question to all of you here is, my taxes have increased $300 in 25 years. Guess how much in the last 3 years? $220. They can't even plow our roads. And I'm supposed to give more money to the government? For what? So my question to all of you guys is, what are you going to do to alleviate the problems of taxes? Not more money.
Okay, stop, please.
That's the question, though. What are you going to do?
Got it. Caitlin, it's your turn.
I believe I answered this in my earlier, the pre-question and everything, but yeah, one of my proposals here, majority of property taxes come from city and county levels. And there's been a lot of really good studies out there, primarily from the Frontier Institute. They're a Helena-based policy think tank that has shown like the growth of cities and counties compared to the spending levels recently. It is out of control. And so, like I said in my prescriptive question, I'm going to bring a bill to cap property tax, cap city and county spending based on population levels and the rates of inflation at that time compared to spending. Thank you.
For me, I think that Montana has a very regressive tax system, and we need to work on that and provide more tax relief to our lower and middle income classes. And we do that by taxing very wealthy, $200,000 plus a year families, or large corporations or businesses at an appropriate rate. Right now, our capital gains tax is locked in at the highest it can get is 6%, and that is something that we should look into changing.
Shelley? I believe one of the ways that we can address the tax problem is to get the businesses here, get them up, get them running, get them going. We are having a very difficult time in Bozeman and in Belgrade with growth. I realize it. But and it's hard on all of us. I mean, being a native, you see all of a sudden I've got, in the Bozeman area, we've got 4-story buildings. We need more, we need to incentivize getting businesses going to help with the tax burdens that we have. And we also need to go to the legislature. I don't know, we're gonna have to educate. Remember, your property tax, people, is coming out of your local governments. It's your levies. It's the bond issues and the levies that we are voting on ourselves to get us there. So it's not just the state.
Elizabeth?
Way back 20 years ago, the Martz administration collapsed the tax brackets. And what this did in effect was it defunded millions of dollars of revenue, and the state has never recovered from that. The last legislative session, the Gianforte administration gave an additional tax break to the upper income levels. And so guess who pays that? It's the people in the bottom and the middle income levels. So I think that's highly unfair when we're being taxed more, you sir and the rest of us, and those at the top of the income scales are being taxed less. Our state needs to invest in programs that have been underfunded since the Martz administration, and we have to let local government do what they can on local taxes. I mean, The reason the Big Sky Housing Trust is successful is because they have a resort tax.
It's the age-old question. Democrats say, if you tax more, you're gonna increase revenue to government. Republicans say, if you decrease taxes, you're gonna increase revenue to government. After 16 years of a Democrat governor, we can never pass tax cuts. And we always had, you know, like I say, 300 to 400 million surplus, if that, or we were in a deficit. 1 year with Gianforte and a Republican legislature, finally we were able to pass tax cuts. We did income tax, we did equipment tax, and a little bit with property tax. Guess what? 1 year later, we have $1.8 billion surplus. We have more money going to government to fund those things, to fund the roads, because we cut taxes, and because people like you that start businesses will expand your businesses, hire more people, get the economy going in Montana, increase the wages that we need in Montana. That's what we need to do.
Thank you. Joe?
I believe what we need to do is, one, we do need to pass more substantial tax cuts for the lower to lower middle class working people of Montana, because they seem to be usually left out of things because they don't have the money to lobby legislators. And then I also believe that we need to be better about utilizing tax revenues that come from sources other than income tax. As I was saying before, we see a fairly substantial windfall from lodging taxes across the state, and a lot of that just kind of gets kicked into a fund and just floats. That's something that we can use to offset property taxes and possibly even incentivize development into the future to increase the supply of housing in Gallatin County and other growing areas, so that that helps at least level off the cost of housing so as wages grow. You're not still being priced out of your community.
Sir? No, right here.
We are all responsible for preserving and protecting our democratic republic. I have a two-part question.
Okay.
First is, to each of you, is Joe Biden our duly elected, properly certified president? Second is, you're all candidates for public office. Will you pledge to us tonight that if your opponent receives more votes than you do, and that's certified by our proper authorities, that you will concede and let your opponent take office?
Okay. Damion, let's just start.
Yes, Joe Biden is our president, and yes, I will concede if I don't win.
Yes, and yes.
Elizabeth?
Joe Biden was a legitimately elected president of the United States, and I believe that Gallatin County has a robust and well-run election office, and our county government further supports that. So I'm grateful to the county for our elections office, and I think the state does a good job. So yeah, I will concede. If I lose.
After the vote, right?
After the vote certified.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll be looking forward to it.
I'm answering my phone.
Honestly, in all the elections I've won, I have never received a call from my opponent. Never. No concession. When I lost a race, I called my Democrat opponent and wished him well. So, yes.
First part of the question?
What was the first part of the question?
Is Joe Biden our duly elected legitimate president?
I think he's our president.
Yes, Joe Biden was duly elected, and yes, I don't have kids' numbers, but I can get it from him if I. We'll do that after this is done.
He's duly elected, terrible job, of course, but, and then also yes, thank you.
Okay, now we got everybody wants to talk. What time, Liz, what time do we need to be out of here?
Our event is scheduled until 8 p.m.
8? Okay.
10 more minutes.
So, I said you next, so make your question short, maybe we can get 2 more in.
On the issue of public lands in Montana, I know the legislature has tried to pass before legislation that would prohibit the selling of public lands. If that comes before the legislature when you guys are in, would you vote for that, or how would you vote on that?
Okay, Damion, is it your turn?
Shelley.
Shelley, sorry.
I really am sorry, I did not hear your question.
Oh, on preserving public lands, if it comes, the legislature has tried to pass legislation before to prevent the selling of public lands. If that comes up during your session, would you vote for that or against
Would
that?
you
Or
oppose
would you
the
support
sale
that?
of public lands?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I support public land staying in public hands, and I think public lands are intimately connected with Montanans' right to hunt, and I raise my sons on wild game, so I'm fully in support of public lands, access to public lands, not fencing them off, and not selling them off for sure.
Kaylee?
I'm sorry. So you are correct. The legislature has had, at least to my knowledge, 2 bills in the past to prevent the sale of public lands. Some of them prevented the sale of, prevented the federal government from selling lands. Other ones, if the lands were transferred to the state, it would prevent the sale of public lands. Do you know that's always Republicans that carry those bills? And do you know that every time one of those bills come up, all Democrats vote against them? But yet Democrats turn around and they send out little campaign mailers saying, Jedediah is trying to sell off your public lands, while I threw on a pack and worked in our public lands every day. It's a lie. And then when it comes to the legislature and the legislature tries to do it and protect public lands, Democrats aren't there. But the media is silent on it. So you need to understand that the Republicans are trying to protect your public land, not the Democrats.
Joe?
I would support legislation of that nature, and it seems to be a fairly bipartisan issue from what I can tell here tonight. So, and I believe that public land is generally for people in the lower income brackets. That's their means of access for common means of enjoyment in wildlife, like hunting and fishing, because many of them can't afford it on private land. So we should do what we can to make sure those lands are available for everyone as often as possible.
Kaylee?
Yes, of course, my voting record proves it. One of those bills that came up last session was from Steve Gunderson out of Libby. I don't have the number right in front of me right now, but every Republican practically supported it, to my knowledge, back in the day. And so, yes, I'm a public lands user and hunter. So.
Damion?
Similarly, also public lands lover and want to make sure they stay protected.
Okay, our time is up. They say we have to be out of here. So, and all the candidates get 2 minutes to say why we should all vote for them. So, I'm going to start with Elizabeth.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Okay.
She never told him that he could go first, but doesn't matter.
Marjorie? Go ahead.
So shoot? Okay. Well, we sat up here and you kindly listened to us. You are the most important people in the room tonight. Your vote is your power. When you think there's too much money in politics, as I do, remember that you and I have the power to do something about it. Americans have defended the right to vote for 246 years, even as those rights have changed and expanded. I got into this race because I want to bring you with me to Helena. I want to bring your issues, your concerns, and your interests. I want to represent you, your families, your loved ones, your work, your homes. This election isn't about me, it's about you. I've heard from you and our neighbors on the doors and in the community for the last 6 months. These are the issues I'm most concerned about and willing to defend on your behalf. Our right to vote without encumbrance. The right of our children to have a quality public education that's respectfully funded for the best outcomes of our children, while exhibiting professional respect and wages for teachers and administrators. Private and intimate healthcare decisions and treatments, including but not limited to abortion services, mental health, and addiction services. Thoughtful, long-term solutions to our housing crisis. The state should be leading this charge and rallying support from all sectors. There's a clear distinction between Jedediah's voting record and each of these issues. In short, I care about you, your freedoms, and our collective good. I invite you to vote for Elizabeth Marum on November 8th. Thank you for your kind attention.
Good.
It's amazing how in election season we hear Democrats talk about freedom. But outside of election season, when we talk about our First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, we have nationwide censoring from that party. We talk about Second Amendment rights, and they're always there to put restrictions on your guns or take your guns away. We talk about Fifth Amendment rights, where it says that when government shall not take property without justly compensating for the private property, yet we have health boards and other individuals taking private property and private resources from businesses here, and Democrats supporting that. The only time we ever hear about Democrats talking about freedom is when it comes to abortion. And honestly, I think that's really sad. I really think it's sad that the only time we hear about freedom is when it's ending another person's life. If you elect me, I will support our Constitution and the freedoms that are expressed in the Constitution. I will support your right to freedom of speech, your right to privacy, your Second Amendment rights, and your right to not have your private property taken without just compensation. And I've done that. I've done that in my legislation, multiple bills. I've carried bills from increasing access to public lands, successfully signed into law, increasing recreation on state public lands. I've carried legislation to provide financial incentives for our emergency service people, our ambulance drivers and those type people, so counties can retain those volunteers. And I've carried bills, like I say, to protect our freedoms. And my experience in the public sector, the private sector, and wide range of legislation I've carried and the knowledge that I carry is going to serve Belgrade the best. Thank you.
I was born and raised in rural Montana. I spent a lot of my life on a ranch that my dad worked on. And for a fair amount of my life, I survived due to public welfare programs and charity from neighbors as best as they could when we were on ranch. They're still around. But anyway, I've seen the best and worst this state has to offer, and I managed to crawl my way up from poverty to get to the lower middle class at best. And I really believe that with my experience, I can make informed decisions based on the opinions of the voters in my district. And I really want to help everyone have the best possible life they can find for themselves in this county and in this state and in this country. Long story short, I'm awesome, and I think you should vote.
Folks, the choice is clear. This election nationwide is a battle for the soul of this country. We can have big impacts here in the state to counteract whatever the Biden administration throws away. But we all here are just very small parts of much bigger battles, but necessary ones to help fix our country. I believe legislators need to have a certain set of moral principles to operate honestly in their jobs. With every decision up there, I factor in the individual over the institution and the defense of that individual's life, liberty, and natural rights. I notice there's really two groups of political types that run for office: the principle or the so-called solutions. But almost every solution I ever see up there is the taking of more people's hard-earned money to pay for some new public program or pay into another institution. The individual gets taken again and again by so-called solutions. As President Reagan famously said in his 1981 inaugural address, in this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. Vote for principles, lower taxes, life and liberty, vote Hinkle.
I'm running because I want to see our public infrastructure be improved, be that our roads, our highways, our electrical grids, our internet access, and our water and sewer. I want to make sure that as we grow at an exponential rate, that we are protecting our environment. We're not polluting our waters and our streams that we, as Montanans, are fortunate enough to get to enjoy all across the state. And so for me, I just mainly want to work my butt off to try and bring back money from the state to be able to fund the projects that we need in this community. And that's it. So if you vote for Lynn, you will see improved infrastructure.
Thank you all very, very much. I really do appreciate the hospitality that we have tonight. I appreciate you folks coming out. I was going to say the voters, but you are the voters, but there's way more of you than just here tonight. But for those of you that took your time, I appreciate you coming and listening to us. I know we don't agree on everything. I mean, it's pretty clear tonight. There's this side and there's this side. And the same way with the questions. I want you to know that if you would elect me to go up and serve you in Helena, I will listen to what you have to say. I may not agree with you, but I will be honest with you. I will not lead you down a path. You will get pretty much black and white answers from me, and I hope we can always be respectful. I will support our Constitution that we have. I will fight for our freedoms that we have. I will fight for business in this because I do believe that Montana is one of, no, I'm sorry, not one of. Montana is the greatest state in our nation, and I want to make sure we keep it that way. We can do this. We need to get government out of our way, and we need to just be people and get our stuff done. Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. And thank you to each of the candidates for running. It's a tough poll this year, and everybody's been very forthright and very polite, and I appreciate it very much. And thank you to the League of Women Voters, to the Belgrade Library, to the Bozeman Library, to the Bozeman Professional Women, to AAUW, because they're the ones who fund this. And thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. And now we'll